Welcome to the Lucian Environmental Podcast channel with me, Grace Matthews. Today we will be discussing asbestos management in higher education with Managing Director of Lucian, Dr. Patrick Morton. Let's start by looking at access. What challenges as an asbestos management company do you face when working with higher education institutions?
I think doing asbestos surveys has moved on a lot. It used to be that they'd be done in occupied areas and things. I think to get a no access, no caveated management asbestos survey, you really need to look at doing locations while they're not occupied. I realise that's something of a challenge for lecture theatres, but weekends, nights, these sorts of things we often find to be effective times to do them. Halls of residence probably present the largest challenge. A lot of universities derive significant amounts of income from out of term time usage of their halls of residence for conferences and things. So one solution that we've come up with for one establishment was to do a room on each level of each of their halls of residence to try and get some typified information as to what sort of level of risk was in the rooms, and then throughout various turnaround points in the term we were able to come back and do additional rooms to try and build up a full picture of the entire hall of residence.
You mentioned accommodation. Last year a figure revealed 17,000 students were sleeping in university bedrooms that contained asbestos. Do you think this figure is accurate?
17,000 students, I mean that's a sort of shocking headline statistic, I suppose, or meant to be. I think to put that in context, the majority of Britain's built stock in the 50s, 60s and 70s has got asbestos in it in some shape or form. And again, it comes down to a question of, is the asbestos in good condition? How accessible is it? The accessibility question is key, particularly in halls of residence, because obviously that room becomes the student's home whilst they're there during those terms in a particular year. And it is important, I think, to make sure that if asbestos could be accessed during normal occupation, that those occupants are made aware. Blissful unawareness is not really a particularly effective control measure.
What about the older buildings? I know some of the UK universities date back to over 200 years old. Are universities still occupying the buildings that were built back this far?
Oh yeah, I mean a lot of Britain's built university stock is very old in some cases, and that presents challenges in itself. And we as a company have done surveys in buildings that have been World Heritage Sites, have been listed, all degrees of listing status. And again, it boils down to planning up front if surveys are going to be done there, to make sure that everybody, including anybody that grants listing consent, is in agreement with the work that's to be done going forward. Particularly pertinent obviously for pre-refurbishment surveys. Ornate plaster work, any form of woodwork, these sorts of things that need not be disturbed and are not going to be disturbed in proceeding building works should be talked about up front, so that the survey organisation is aware of the fragilities of the buildings. Then we go right through to much more modern stock that contains asbestos, such as clasp. So that's a particular brand of system built building. They can contain quite substantial amounts of asbestos, normally associated obviously with the sort of school environment, but actually quite a lot of higher education establishments can have class buildings as well, and they require a particular approach to their management.
Yeah, let's look at the Department for Education's policy review, for example. Could this be adapted to higher education?
Well, I guess indirectly. They're not actually covered by the consultation document directly, but the Department of Education has definitely issued some very meaningful guidance in the past on management of asbestos in system-built buildings, some of which do exist in university stock. And there's definitely a certain transference of knowledge between these two areas. They get used in similar ways. They probably have similar levels of footfall, and could be potentially subject to the same use and abuse, which may or may not give rise to asbestos release, depending on effective management measures being put in place.
It just brings me to the question. I mean, Asbestos in schools, obviously all over the press at the moment, academy schools. Why is this not the case for higher education, do you think?
Well, I suppose news sells newspapers. It's definitely easier to describe in the school estate per se, but there's no doubt about it. Higher education, tertiary education establishments do face very, very similar challenges in terms of managing the asbestos within their estate.
Apart from the obvious legal requirements, what are the main benefits, do you think, from compliant duty holders of universities?
I think there are many benefits, Grace. Obviously, all organisations seek to reduce any health and safety related incidents, and effective asbestos management will obviously result in fewer or no incidents. The Health and Safety Executive has paid an interest in higher education establishments in recent years, some examples of which include University of Lincoln fined £10,000 plus £12,800 costs, Aston University fined £4,000 plus £2,000 costs, and City of Bristol College fined £10,000 plus £18,900 costs. Okay, not vast sums of money, but one also has to think of the reputational damage. HSE now also charging fee for intervention at a rough rate of £930 per day for investigating incidents. And obviously ineffective asbestos management can lead to an organisation becoming constrained by its own policies and procedures, and for example, if the location and identification of asbestos is not known accurately, an organisation can actually start to spend money on asbestos that either isn't there or is presumed to be there, or no accesses have presumed to be there. So obviously getting surveys and information up to scratch can actually bring a net saving in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, how is it getting to the point where the HSE are prosecuting these higher education institutions? I mean, why is it that they're not, following legal requirements? And
well, I don't know the ins and outs of each of those cases, but the majority of incidents that we certainly come across are generally through things such as lack of control of contractors or information not actually getting into the hands of people that could potentially disturb asbestos.
yeah, I mean, presumably each university will have an allocated facilities manager that should be dealing with this.
Generally, it will be the remit of an estates team or a facilities team, yes, to deal with it. But it's really about dissemination of information. A lot of university and higher education campuses and facilities can be quite large and widespread, so it's important that the information is at the point of use, if you like, the asbestos records.
Well, what advice would you give to these building managers, estates teams, to keep up to date, to ensure they are compliant?
Well, I think it's worth undertaking an annual review of policy and procedure to make sure that it meets with all the current legislation. Re-inspections should definitely be done at least annually on known asbestos containing materials, and registers should be kept up to date and in the locations that they're needed.
So to summarise, what would you advise duty holders to do?
Well, I think the control of asbestos regs, regulation for duty to manage asbestos in non-domestic premises, bit of a mouthful, has been around now for just over a decade. So it's probably worth undertaking a fairly dispassionate root and branch review of asbestos management procedures and maybe carry out some spot checks in buildings. So actually go armed with the information, find the particular item concerned, and then go backwards in terms of auditing to see how robust the record trail is over that preceding year and how well your policy actually manages dealing with some of those specific items. It might also be worth looking at information for your estate in the round and see if there are any gaps, any buildings that have been acquired or any buildings that have been disposed of that can be knocked out of the asbestos management regime. And really just to take a sort of holistic review, look at the whole thing, I think would be a sensible starting point.
Thank you, Patrick. And for more information on Lucian Podcast, please visit www.lucian.co.uk/podcasts.